I'm Joel McLeod, and welcome to the 905er. This past summer, flight attendants with Air Canada and CUPE were legislated to mandatory mediation by the Carney government. They ignored it and forced Air Canada back to the bargaining table. Here in Ontario, listeners will remember Doug Ford invoking the Notwithstanding Clause to force CUPE support workers back into schools when negotiations broke down. They ignored that action and forced the government back to the bargaining table. This seemed like a new age of solidarity in the labor movement. However, do all good things come to an end? In February, in the provincial election, LiUNA, the carpenters union and hospitality unions, came out in support of Doug Ford and the Ontario PC government. Most recently, LiUNA announced that they would be leaving the Ontario Federation of Labor over their supposed treatment of Doug Ford and the Ontario PC government and its support of LiUNA's training center. So what is going on with Ontario's labor movement? Well, I thought I'd go straight to the top for this episode, folks. Joining me today is President of the Ontario Federation of Labor, Laura Walton. The Ontario Federation of Labor represents over 1 million workers in 54 unions across Ontario. Laura joins me to discuss the current state of the labor movement in Ontario, LiUNA's departure from the OFL, and where their political allegiance lies currently in Ontario and the future of labor. Okay, thank you, Laura Walton, President of the Ontario Federation of Labor, for coming on today to talk with me about the labor movement in general. This is an episode I've kind of been wanting to do for a while, and I'm glad that you found it in your schedule to come on. Thank you very much for joining me.
I'm absolutely excited to be here. It's a long time coming, but I'm glad that we're doing it.
The reason why I want to do this is, we're coming off the summer, a lot of things happen, and my take on it is, in recent years, the labor movement in Canada has taken on, I think, a bit more of a defiant tone. And by that, I'm going to refer to when Doug Ford invoked the Notwithstanding Clause, CUPE just said no. And more recently, over the summer, the federal government, with Prime Minister Carney, mandated that the CUPE with Air Canada flight attendants would be mandated to mandatory arbitration, and they said no.
Yeah.
What has marked this shift in this kind of behavior? Like what is going on in the labor movement that in previous years, yes, you might have just been stomp your feet and say, okay, we'll have to abide the law. This time you're just saying no, not having any of it.
Yeah.
Where is this coming from?
Well, I think, I can speak personally about where it came from for CUPE and the education workers. It was, decades of just being beaten by successive governments. Like, it wasn't just one government or another. I've got to be clear. Like, the Liberals took their turn at us, and then the Conservatives took their turn at us. And so I think really in that situation, it came down to, we've got nothing left to lose. Things are getting so bad. And when you're faced with the fact that you've got nothing left to lose, then you're in a position that you can say, I'm done and I'm going to stand up. But I think what's also happening is, once one group of workers takes that brave move, then it actually empowers other workers to say, hey, wait a minute. But it also empowers communities to do the same. And we saw that with, tenants strikes, just more recently, where, once one group of people decides, hey, listen, if we stand up, if we band together, if we consolidate our power and we push back, we can win. And I think it just empowers others to do it. And I mean, that can go both ways, right? Good and bad. Right? It isn't always altruistic. It isn't always, but I think, there's this movement within Canada, within the United States, within, globally, where people are like, listen, this is as bad as I'm willing to have it. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to push back now.
Are you worried at all of the potential blowback from the public on this? I mean, this is the government legislating you to do something, and basically you are breaking the law here.
Yeah. So I think what I would say is that the public is the workers. And I think the government would like you to believe that the public is somehow separate and distinct from workers. And that's a complete false narrative. Workers are in your community. You're a worker. I'm a worker. I remind people all the time, if you are exchanging your labor for money and you're not signing that paycheck, then you're a worker. And so I think that there's this false narrative that, oh, it's workers against the public. No, 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 no. Workers are fighting for their communities. Workers are ensuring that there are good paying jobs in their communities, because when we have good paying jobs in our communities, we have restaurants having people go out to eat. We're having people buy groceries. We're having people sign their kids up for community sports. These things are happening. When we remove those things from our communities, that's when they turn into ghost towns and nobody wins. So, I think actually, no, it's one of the things that I love doing, is one of the things that I'm really proud of workers doing, is getting out into communities and having these conversations. Because quite frankly, if you've got a government that is setting up laws that are unjust, that's not a government that anyone wants to be part of. It's actually a scary system. And, people will say to me, well, all you do is complain about the government. You're darn right. It's my job to critique the government. And if you want me to not critique the government, that's called fascism. And I'm not here for that.
Okay, this is going to be an awkward segue off that note, but let's do it.
You can edit.
I try not to edit as much as possible on this podcast. So the with Doug Ford using the notwithstanding clause to legislate CUPE back to work into schools.
Yeah.
And then the labor movement, CUPE basically said, no, we're not having it. We're going back to protesting outside Queen's Park. Mm-hmm. What did that signal to unions in Ontario? That, and I'm kind of the whole story of like, the notwithstanding clause is a major legislative attack on your right to bargain, your right to assemble, all expression, all that. What did that signal to you? And then what did the aftermath signal to unions as well?
So I think, for that, I go back to, we had so many like meetings, as that was like with workers, right? As we were moving along and what we were going to do. And I can remember one of our leaders up north, young single mom with 3 kids. And I'll never forget it. We were talking about it and we were saying, okay, like, well, what if, what are we going to do? And I remember she spoke up and she said, but if we don't stand up and say no, then he can do this to just about anyone. And I don't want that for my kids. And I remember that moment so distinctly, because I remember thinking, here's this young mother, single mom, 3 kids, she's not financially stable. This is going to have an impact on her and her life. And she was choosing the path of the future rather than just, being bullied. And I think that to me stuck. Like, okay, this is where we're on the right side of history. This is what we need to do. And I think what you saw was other unions recognizing, oh, wait a minute, if we let him do this to us, it's only going to be a matter of time before we don't make him happy. And then it's going to be us too. And so people like kind of band together. And I think like following that, and I said it the other day in another interview, for unions now, it's no longer a matter of if you're going to strike, but you have to have a plan for when the government interferes with your strike. Because that's what we're seeing, right? Whether it's Doug Ford and his notwithstanding clause, whether it's, Mark Carney and his use of Section 107, unions and workers in general have to be thinking as they're going into it. Okay, it used to be we go into bargaining, we don't get what we need, there's an impasse, we go on strike. Now people need to be thinking about, okay, we go into bargaining, both sides don't agree, there's an impasse, we go on strike. Oh, but when the government interferes, now this is what we're going to need to do. And I think that that's what you're going to see moving forward is this, pushback to say, no, like you actually don't get to do that. And I think that that's something that both sides are going to, because I think like the bosses have really relied on government interference in collective bargaining, right? We saw it with the port workers. We've seen it with the rail workers. We've seen it with Air Canada. We're seeing it with the postal workers. Those bosses are relying on the government interfering so that they don't actually have to bargain. They can just, drag their feet and wait for the government to jump in. And when workers are saying, that's not how this is going to go, I think it really improves. I think it's better for our community.
On that note, in the recent provincial election, LiUNA, the Carpenters Union here in Ontario, as well as I was looking on the Tory website, Unite Here, Local 75, in the hospitality sector, they were private sector unions that endorsed Doug Ford and the Ontario PCs. This was kind of landmark, because I don't think I've ever known any union endorsing the Ontario PCs for government. I want to know what's your take on that? What do you, as the president of the Ontario Federation Labor Movement, take from that this, did Doug Ford crack union solidarity? in that
No.
election? What's
I
your
think he
take?
would like to think that he cracked union solidarity, but to me, labor is a family. And I don't know about you, but in my family, we have people who vote PC, we have people who vote liberal, we have people who vote NDP, we have people who don't vote at all. It doesn't mean that they're not my family, doesn't mean that we don't disagree, but it also doesn't mean that when you come after one of us, that we're going to forsake the other. And I think that that's the one thing that people need to remember. I think that all unions do what's best for their members, right? That is our goal. But I also want to encourage people to realize that, like Laura Walton, I can't make you vote in any way, shape, or form. I can talk to you about the importance of voting. I can talk to you about, what the party platforms are and how, they work for workers or don't work for workers. But I think, people need to remember that when you're seeing endorsements, many times most endorsements aren't actually going to the floor of an entire membership. Right. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your entire membership turns up to vote for those folks. But I think, there's work that can be done. I think, there is reasons why, LiUNA, the carpenters, they are seeing investments into their organizations through the Skills Development Fund around their training centers. I think that's a great thing. Quite frankly, my position is that the Skills Development Fund should be formalized for union training centers. They shouldn't have to jump through a hoop. We shouldn't be seeing what we're seeing in the Auditor General's report, because I know that unions keep immaculate records, and the KPIs that they would have would go above and beyond. And I'm pretty confident that they probably were the higher rated application processes. But the problem is that what I'm seeing is parties of all stripes kind of, using, oh, well, I've got these people, you've got these people. And as a labor movement, we have to be reminded constantly that at the end of the day, there's not a single politician or boss that is given anything that you need or you want it freely. It's always come with a fight. And when that fight happens, it's the people who are by your side that matter. And that's where the labor movement, where the OFL, where the CLC, that's where we come in.
Okay, I'm going to put a pin in that statement. We're going to come back to it later, but I want to finish off on this tangent. And most recently, LiUNA made headlines with leaving the OFL because of they're saying that you weren't basically Doug Ford friendly enough.
Yeah.
I want to. Do you think that marks a line in the sand between public sector and private sector unions? Like, is that?
Yeah, I'm going to say this, not on my watch. I don't believe that we should be doing that. Listen, I think if you talk to any of them, I'm not anything enough. I'm not Doug Ford friendly enough. I wasn't liberal enough. I'm not NDP enough. I'm not anything enough. I believe that my job as the Ontario Federation of Labor is to make demands of any government to ensure the best possible outcomes for workers, both unionized and non-unionized. And until the day that we have a government that is handing over a living wage, handing over proper, if you kill a worker, you go to jail, proper health and safety, regulations like heat stress, paid sick leave, until we have all of those things that workers need enshrined into legislation, I'm going to critique every single government, because I'm not seeing any government to date deliver what workers need in Ontario.
You talked about the Skills Development Fund, and LiUNA, they left mostly because my take was that the funding going to their training centers that the provincial government was contributing. There seemed to be a lot of back scratching there. I want to get your take on this fund, because to me, as kind of layperson outside of it, I understand your critique of it is that this money should be going to our colleges and post-secondary education programs. I want to know what your why you think that's where the money should be going, rather than not even like a LiUNA fund, but like an OPSU or a CUPE center, or why doesn't every union have its own little training campus?
Absolutely. So here's my take on it. In a province as rich as Ontario, in a province that is seeing unprecedented unemployment rates, we actually have the ability to properly fund training centers, post-secondary education, whether that be college or university. We can do it all. As a matter of fact, other provinces are doing it, right? So this isn't a matter of ability, this is a matter of will. And so rather than using it as kind of a wedge between public or private, and there are some public sector unions, SEIU has seen investments in their training centers. I think that if a union has come together and they can deliver the training, which we've seen amazing training, like the operating engineers, like the work that they do does not exist in any college or university in Ontario, then why isn't that funding formalized for them in the same way that we fund education through colleges and universities? Why do they have to jump through a hoop and have an application process? Quite frankly, in my world, we should be providing funding to all venues. There are so many different pathways to the way to work. And so we should be funding those properly. And it shouldn't be, this, jump through hoop situation. It should be properly funded, and it should be guaranteed year after year. It should be in the budget that way. And that's not what we're seeing. And that's what I would call on Ford to do. I believe that providing money to LiUNA is the right thing to do. I believe providing money to SEIU, Unite Here, Steel down in Hamilton has it. I believe that that's the right thing to do. I actually call on Ford to formalize this, to make it part of the ongoing budget so that these unions are not jumping through hoops to get it. And I also want to just be very clear. The majority of the money that goes into those training centers actually comes from membership dues. The majority of it is not coming from the government itself. These are members that are self-funding these training centers. And so I think the Skills Development Fund is great if we're using it properly. But I also have big questions as to why $5 million are going to corporations that have no, accountability. I have a big concern when you're seeing companies such as Merit, open source, who actively lobby to have Ford remove the card check certification when they're getting way more money than any of the unions. These are some of the things that I have and that I'm going to call into question, and I am going to question it. Where are the KPIs? Where are the factors that are making these things happen? And are you really working for workers if you're funding the same organizations that want to rip away some of the pieces that are so fundamental to workers in the first place?
On that note, I would also point out recently in the Trillium, Charlie Pinkerton and Jennifer Smith Cross reported that the Auditor General pointed out that of the applicants for the Skills Development Fund, 54%, I'm just quoting here, 54%, which received the majority of the $1.3 billion in provincial funding that Spence's office focused on, were ranked as having, quote, lower quality proposals than other high-ranked proposals were denied. That being, I'm going to leave my audience to make their own conclusions on that. That being said, like why wouldn't we just put the money into our colleges? Because in my thinking is, we have kids coming out of high school. They want to get into the trades, and we need them. We need the journey people in the trades more than ever in this economy. Put them in, get them a trade, carpentry, electrician, whatever, plumbing. Put them into the workforce, and if they go, the idea would then they go into a workforce where a union or a potentially to be unionized say, okay, we're going to come, we're going to fight for job safety, fair wages, and whatnot. I'm struggling to understand the value of the idea of each union having its own skill development center, when wouldn't it make more sense to be able to say, we'll pay for you to go back to a college to get that skills upgrade, new materials coming on the market, or a new technology is out there and you need to get a certificate on how to use that.
Yeah.
We'll pay to send you back. Wouldn't that be a more better use of union dues, of our tax dollars?
Yeah, I think like we kind of have to go back in time, right? To like what apprenticeships are versus college. So, back in the day, Bill Davis, a conservative, created colleges, and it was intended to provide training for the communities in which they serve. Full stop. We've lost that. Like we're way away from that now. And then apprentices have always been about training under the master, right, the journey person around this job. And so there kind of was with colleges trying to get the bigger share of tuitions, there started to be these programs, these micro-credentialing created through colleges, to your point, right? Oh, well, here's this new thing, this new skill. So we're going to put it into the college, you pay tuition. But those are micro-credentials. The fact is that when kids are going through, or when students are going through, if they get their college diploma in carpentry, for instance, they don't have their red seal. They then have to apprentice again. So what happens is that a lot of folks are going through these college programs and then finding, oh, wait, what I have right now doesn't actually land me in a job, right? I've got to go and find somebody to apprentice under. And the unions have already been doing this work for ages and ages and ages and ages and ages, right? So they know how many they've got, they know how many people they can put out. And so that's where we actually have to sit down in a room and say, okay, what is the best way? What actually needs to be a university course? What actually needs to be a college course? What can actually be done properly through workers teaching workers? And I think that that's the piece that's missing, is that we're not actually calling in people to have good conversations. We're pitting people against each other. And no one wins when we do that. Not a single one of us win. And so what I'm seeing is, we're pitting college against university against the unions and the union trades, like the trades unions who are doing these training centers. And meanwhile, the only one who's winning are like the privateers that are coming in and trying to make profit off of education. And to me, that is like horseshit. Part of my language, but I'm like, come on, no, let's have a conversation about this. I have a son, a daughter, and a niece and a nephew. They are the perfect example of kids in Ontario. One is in post-grad, finishing their law degree. One is going through university to become a nurse. One is in college in a business diploma. And the other one just signed on to the sheet metal workers. They are literally a snapshot of what the future of Ontario is. All of those pathways are valid. Why are we not properly funding all of those pathways? Why are we ensuring that profit is kept the heck out of all of those pathways? Nobody should be making money off of our kids' future, right? It's an investment into our future. And I think, that's what I would actually like us to see, is I would like to bring everybody together and say, let's actually talk. Let's talk about this. Take the government and their promises and all of that out of it. What do we actually need to see for workers? And listen, the first group that does that, I mean, I'm there for it. You call me, I'll help bring anyone I can together to do that.
Well, on that note, I said we'd circle back to this, and I guess the question is, unions' endorsements of political parties, I would argue in the last 20 years, has become rather fluid. I mean, traditionally, people assume, oh, you're union, therefore you're automatically NDP. You're going to side with the NDP. I know you spoke at the NDP AGM most recently, so if you want to put me in my place, so be it. I will.
No, it's all good.
But I of the progressive parties in Ontario, at least, my take is that they've been rather reluctant recently to embrace unions, to go after it and say, okay, we need to rebuild this relationship or this partnership, if you will. I know I listeners will know I used to work for the Ontario Liberal Party. I know they worked very hard to try and get teachers unions on their side. That relationship has obviously frayed, and I think it's held together with spit and tape at the moment. What's your take on that? Like when you're the president of OFL and you're looking at the political parties in Ontario, I guess I'm wondering, like, what does that look like for you right now? Are you dismayed? Are you banging your head against the wall and saying, like, who's going to talk about what issues are priority to us? Are you at the table? Like, what does that relationship look like at the moment?
So, here's what I would say. I would say that I think clearly workers are important because all parties court them. Clearly unions are important because all parties court them, right? And so I always get giggling because people are like, well, I'd like unions, but not those unions. Unions are unions, right? We all do the same thing. And so this idea, and I think Doug Ford himself is like, I like these unions, but I don't like those. And I'm like, buddy, a union is a union. Let's work. But I think, there has been a real, probably in the last 25 years, like real bend towards transactional politics, right? I give you my endorsement, you give me something in return. And none of those things are sustainable. I think we've seen that, right? And so I think we have to be cautious of that. I think really what we have to look at is what do workers need? The NDP was created by labor, right? So when people say, oh, if you're in a union, you must be an NDPer. Well, it's kind of a take on this idea of like, originally that's who founded the NDP part, the NDP. But I think that, and I'm here in Edmonton right now with the Amalgamated Transit Union. And I said this yesterday, like, you can't sit there and say, well, it's the political parties for not paying attention to us when you actually haven't made your demands known. And you haven't been out there being clear. And listen, I talked to David Piccini and I'll say to him, listen, until which time you deliver heat stress, we're going to have a problem. Until which time you start addressing violence in classrooms and violence in hospitals, we're going to keep having a problem. You can build all the hospitals in the world, but if you're not actually going to staff them, it just means we've got a whole lot of buildings. We don't have healthcare. These are the things that and I will talk. I've talked to John Fraser. As a matter of fact, John Fraser, apologized for Bill 115 just recently. And, I do talk to every single politician. I have no problem talking to them, but my demands are always the same. I will always pick workers over any political party because workers are really what makes our province run. But it's going to be important. And I think, we have to go back to our roots of like, what does a Labor Party look like? And a Labor Party can't be transactional. A Labor Party needs to be a group of people who are coming together to look out for the best interest of workers, whether those are actively working, retired, unemployed, underemployed, self-employed. We need to be looking at as a whole, what do workers need? And when you start looking at that instead of what bosses need, I think that's when we're actually going to turn a corner. And I do believe that corner is coming, right? I honestly, I'm starting to see it as people are getting, especially with the mango menace down to the south. I think people are like, wait a minute, I'm not cool with what's happening right now. I need to focus on this.
I'm glad you brought up our neighbors to the south because in America, there has been a lot of legislation at the state and at the federal level meant at dismantling unions, and that's a discussion for a different time. However, one cannot look at America and notice the division within their society right down the line. I remember reading an article advocating that where's the common ground to bring left and right together, and people are saying our unions, like unions are a common goal oriented organization that you can have people on the right and on the left kind of come together and say, let's achieve this goal. Do you think that I don't think we're quite as divided here in Canada, thankfully, as they are in the States, but there is a division that creeps up. We're not immune to it.
Yeah, no, I think yet is the word you're looking for. We're not as divided yet.
Okay, but how do you view your role then in trying to kind of keep that poison? I'm going to call it what it is. It's a poison. Keep it on the at least out of our government or out of our politics and our social civility.
It's the one thing that I really love, actually. It's finding that commonality. It's finding, because I don't care who you are. I don't care how you voted. I honestly, when it comes down to it, I want to hear, and I will find what the commonality is. And typically, people believe, I was just saying it yesterday in my speech here, nobody sitting in the room that I was in wants to walk over to their neighbor and say, I want you to lose your job. Right? Everybody wants their neighbor to be employed. Everybody wants their family to be employed. Everybody wants them to be able to have decent paying jobs because, when people are doing well, other people are doing well. Well, if that's the commonality, then why in the heck are we not demanding it from our government? Right. And I think governments really used this whole tariff temper tantrum that was happening, to say, well, if you vote for me, then I'm going to protect you. Well, frankly, Carney's elbows up, whatever, like feet on the street is more effective. But we're not seeing him deliver that. Ford was going to protect us from tariffs. We're seeing record high unemployment in Ontario, low housing starts. But I think what we need to do is, as workers, is what is it that we actually need? And that's actually what I'm really excited about at the OFL, because we're putting together a workers initiative that was built by workers for workers, by doing different surveys, talking in different communities about what workers want to see. And what they're telling us it's pretty clear. They want good paying jobs that allow them to have some benefits and a pension, and that they can maybe have a vacation once a year where they get to relax. Like nobody is asking to pick the right 6 numbers. Workers are asking to do a decent day's work for a decent day's wage. And I think that that's the commonality that we have to keep pushing, and making sure that we don't turn it into the divide and conquer, that they've got us fighting over crumbs while they sit and eat the cake we baked.
Why is that argument so hard to make? Because I'll talk to. I live in Burlington. It's a well-to-do a city in Ontario. A lot of high income earners here in Ontario. I'm going to argue very low union membership, to be truthful. But whenever you talk about stuff like that, why can't we get a fair wage? I don't want to say fair wage. I want to say a living wage.
Living wage.
Like a wage that. The idea of you go to work for 40 hours a week and you can put a roof over your family's head and food on the table and not be stressed out over what's left over, that seems to be just such like you're asking too much. And I'm wondering, how did we get here and how do we turn it around? Because I don't think in a country like Canada, a province like Ontario, that should be the bare minimum
Minimum. Yeah.
of how our economy and our society should work. And I just want to know why is right now there are people saying, "Oh, you're Joel, you're a fucking commie,"
Yeah.
and I'm not. But like, why are we just? That just seems like so. That's too much of an ask.
Yeah, I think words have been weaponized. I saw a clip on TikTok the other day of a movie, and it said a child asked if they were a commie, and the father said, "Well, if you're at school and you have a sandwich and your friend doesn't have anything to eat, what do you do?" And they said, "Well, I would give them the sandwich." And they said, "You wouldn't sell it to them, you wouldn't, you know?" And they're like, "No." And they said, "Well, I guess you're a commie." I think words have been weaponized. I think intrinsically our kids know that you're supposed to look after each other, right? I think we all like we raise our children to know that if your friend is hurt on the school ground, that you look after them, that if somebody doesn't have something to eat, you look after them. We raise our children to be those good people. But then as they grow, you've got society and social media that bombard them with these messages that these things are bad. Like Antifa is the one that makes me giggle. Like, suddenly
Yeah,
is saying it's a bad thing. I'm like, help me, please, someone. But I think where the problem is that we've lost the ability to civilly have a conversation with each other and say, okay, I get that you think I'm being a commie because I believe everybody should have a decent job, but let's talk about at the root what that looks like. And I think, it's this idea of like pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. You heard Doug Ford say it the other day. If a youth can't find a job, it's because they're just not looking hard enough.
yeah.
Friends.
I've heard. I've been. Yeah, I've been on both sides of that. Where it's hard to find work, but I've also been on the owner management side, and I can tell you this much. Um, it's not that I think kids are lazy. I think it's hard to find like the idea of kids not finding work is I was thinking of Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons is open 24 hours a day. McDonald's is open 24 hours a day. These used to be jobs that positions
Mhm.
that the idea was, oh, you're 15 years old, you need an after school job just to make some money to go buy
Yeah.
clothes, buy a video game, buy a CD, whatever. CDs are used to be what Spotify and Apple came on before kids, just in case you were
Let's
wondering.
not even get into the cassettes.
Yeah. But like that is just like free spending money, right? I'll work a 5 hour shift at the end of the day at a McDonald's or whatever. Now these corporations, because their economic models say we can be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I know as a parent, I am not letting my teenage daughter work the overnight shift at McDonald's or Tim Hortons.
No.
So who's going to work that? Well, it's going to be chances are a mom, and it will be a mom. I know because that's who applies for those jobs. Who say
Yeah.
I can do the 8 hour shift overnight, and it's hard to make ends meet on 14 or $15 an hour.
Mhm.
It's a and I also know for the fact that when the last time we made a big minimum wage increase, I think it was from like 7 to 14 or 8 to 14, whatever. We were told it was going to collapse the economy because all these businesses would go under, and nobody went under. So I just my question is I'm wondering like just that's disconnect from the reality. Like we've been through this before. We've raised minimum wage, or we've said we need to increase working standards,
Yeah.
and it we're told it will collapse the economy. It doesn't.
No.
Um, but to say just go get a job is also like, well, no, like we're getting into a position where, I don't know where youth go get jobs where it's no, I just need you to come in for 4 or 5 hours after school, 2 or 3 days a week too. Because
Yeah, I think you're completely right. Like I know I'm going to be dating myself right now, but I can remember walking over after high school to go work my shift at the byway, right? You
yeah,
did maybe 2 shifts during the week after school, and then you worked a Saturday or a Sunday. And that was the money that, put, you got
yeah,
pizza with your friends kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like that's what you did. But I'm a mom of a 23-year-old and a 19-year-old. My daughter worked in a dairy during the pandemic. But she was one of the only teenagers working at this dairy during everybody else was an adult. And, she was picking up the shifts that they couldn't pick up because they were working 2 or 3 different jobs because there weren't jobs in our community that were good paying jobs that allowed these adults to put roofs over their heads. So,
Right.
they were making a semi-decent wage, but then this was topping up, their semi-decent wage to make it so they could make rent. My son has struggled finding jobs because there just aren't the jobs, right? When picking between a 19-year-old boy and a 27-year-old woman who has rent and commitments, people are picking the person who has rent and commitments for, all the right reasons, right? So it's hard for them to get in, but because they also aren't getting that, like, as much as I laugh about Byway, it taught me the value of showing up to work on time, a decent, putting in the effort and you got a paycheck. Like, those are skills that our kids need to learn. And unfortunately, they're not getting the work experience to even do that. So I think we've got to take a look at, like, you said it has to be a living wage. I was talking because minimum wage was raised yesterday by 40 cents. The sky is, according to the world, the sky is going to fall because we've raised it by 40 cents. And I'm like, this guy's not going to fall. And as a matter of fact, we still aren't giving enough money to vote. It's still not enough money for people to pay rent. So what do we do?
Well, that is the question. I might want to push back on you because, like, for a lot of people, I get the sense is it's not working. The idea of I go to work for 40 hours a week, I should be able to, I don't need to live like a king or I don't
No.
need to live like a queen, but I should be able to put food on the table, a roof over my family's head, and yeah, put a little bit away for a rainy day or that, vacation in the summertime.
Yeah.
And I want some time off to enjoy. So I need time off to spend this money
Yeah.
to generate economic returns, other jobs, other investments in the economy. Like, that's how the economy, you do need time off to spend the money that you're making.
Yeah. You
And
can't work 80 hours a week and enjoy your life.
right, and that's just it. It's like we can't. And I just like, do we need to? I'm bringing this up because we're entering into a kind of a reset in the Ontario political cycle. We've got Merritt Stiles back to the NDP leader. We're going to have a new Ontario Liberal leader at some point.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, like, is that, like, do you as a labor movement need to inject that conversation into the public discourse? This idea that we need to hold a promise of you work hard, you get enough to not survive, but to thrive.
To thrive. Absolutely. I think, the tenets of, the labor movement, and I turned to my colleague, Anthony Marco out of Hamilton, it was the 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, 8 hours of play. That was the essence behind the 40-hour work week, right? This is how our lives should be broken down. And we've lost that, right? And now it's this gig, side hustle economy. I
Right.
think we've got to go back to the roots. Like, when you're talking to people and they say, oh, I remember the good old days, I remind them that the good old days had some of the highest periods of unionization that we have seen when it was the
Right.
good old days. And it was where people were having pensions. It's where people were having a decent wage. What we've seen is, like, during the 80s, during Reaganomics, those kinds of things, is like the bosses getting extremely rich and the workers going less and less and less. And it needs to be a reset. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be people who make their fortune. There's always going to, we live in a capitalistic society. There's always going to be people who make their fortune, but we also have to value the work and the labor that's being provided to workers and pay them a fair wage. And I think, like, that's what needs to happen. And people will say to me, oh, well, if you pay people too much, they'll be lazy. That's not actually how that works. That's not what happens. And I think what we need to do is, like, think about what are the compounding factors that are making it so that people aren't able to do what we need to do. And a lot of it is because of this scarcity model, right? This scarcity model that has us fighting each other instead of collectively coming together and saying, there's way more of us than there are of them. Let's make the demands that we need. Let's make sure that we're doing, and let's make sure that our kids have a future. I talk reminiscently about working at Byway and having a few extra dollars. That isn't the same childhood as my kids. My kids are 19 and 23. By the time I was 23, I was out on my own. My daughter's still at our home. Love her being there. I have not pushing her out by any means, but I am seeing that there is a distinct difference between what my children are experiencing as young adults and what I experienced as young adults. And that was completely different than what my parents experienced as young adults. And I don't think it's I don't think it's improving, but I think we've got to do something now to improve it.
Well, definitely. I mean, I go on TikTok and maybe it's the algorithm. who knows? But I'm getting fed a lot of stuff about Asian countries, China, South Korea, and Japan. And I'm looking at these cities, cosmopolitan, very beautiful
Mhm.
cities. And then people are talking about what life, day-to-day life is like in these cities, Shenzhen in China, Hong Kong, not so much Hong Kong, but like these cities have fantastic urban transit. They have technology that is ubiquitous. They don't have homeless people. They don't have mental, at least people on the street corner dealing with addictions. And what got me was like 10 o'clock at night in public parks, they have Tai Chi classes and people going for bike rides in downtown major parks. And I'm thinking to
Yeah.
myself, yeah, I mean, I'd like that without the, totalitarian government
Regime.
regime. But they're clearly, there's something going on there that they're able to do this. People are enjoying themselves.
Mhm.
And I said, like, why are we not able to do that here in Canada? They are these are people able to work, enjoy their lives, and really kind of build something for their families. And I'm no system is perfect, but I look at it and say we're doing something wrong here when you walk out any street in any uh city here in the 905 and you see encampments, you see people
Mhm.
suffering from addiction and mental illness, and our response from our leaders is go pick up a job application. That's going to solve
Mhm.
everything.
Completely gonna solve everything. And I think you've hit it. And I think it comes back to like, the old saying of we've got to stop picking people out of the river and we've got to go upstream to figure out why the heck they're falling in.
Mm.
And I think, that's the problem is that everybody wants to say, oh, well, we've got these encampments. Oh, okay, well, we're just going to tear down the encampments. Or I just heard today that Barrie has decided that it's
Yeah.
now illegal to give people water. Like, what in the fresh hell? Where are we that we've now moved into a place that it is illegal for someone to be a caring person? That to me is vile. And it should be called out, and it should be called out completely. But I think what we've done is we've destroyed the social safety net, and we've decided that if you need the social safety net, that somehow that means you're weak. But we're forgetting, like, where did these things come from? The social safety nets were actually created when people came home from war for fighting for their country, and we recognized, oh gee, they brought some baggage home with us. How are we going to help them so that they can function again in society? And it didn't mean they were weak. It just meant that they needed some supports. I have all the time in the world for people that need supports. And so that we're helping them and we're teaching them how to fish, that kind of idea. But we've turned it into our communities. I keep saying to everybody, sure, we got rid of supervised consumption sites. So now everywhere is a consumption site. Like that's what you've created. And people say, oh, well, we shouldn't have them. If you have been to a bar, you've been to a supervised consumption site. I want everybody to understand that. And so I think, there was just this real nastiness of like, if you are ill, if you are not meeting a standard, that somehow you're less than and you don't deserve the same treatment. And I have a real problem with that. And I think, I have a real problem with governments that are like passing laws that are criminalizing, you know, needing help. That's what it
Mm.
is. You're criminalizing needing help. We wouldn't need encampments if we were actually properly supporting and getting people the help that they need. You can't get into a doctor. What are you going to do? You don't have and I love how, oh, well, just go and get a job application. Sure. I have no known address. Yeah, my job application is going to get picked up for sure.
Well,
Right.
I always wonder. Okay, Doug, you go hire somebody from that. Go down to Gore Park here in Hamilton, and just take a pick of the litter and get somebody to come and drive your car. Like I know you're the premier. You need a driver.
Yeah.
Just
You don't
go.
need the guy. Yeah, you don't need the police. We'll have these folks do it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the people say, "Oh, go get a job." Well, go hire. Like we have thousands of
Yeah.
people on the street. You should be
And
able
I
to just
think
go
that
pick.
even if like suddenly if there was a way for us to provide everybody with a job, that still doesn't take away the fact that we also need to provide the supports so that people are learning and growing as they go, right?
Mhm.
Because we all get dealt, like I remind everybody every day, you and I are each just one catastrophe away from being the people in Gore Park. right? It's there by the grace of the creator that we are where we are. And so I really like it. We need to have those supports in place. We need to have those supports in place that when something does happen, that people are not drowning, that people are actually, that we're bringing them along with. Because when I see encampments, I reminded like that's somebody's son or daughter, right? That is making a choice, that is in a difficult situation. And, you know, there, I could be them, then, you know, I could be them in 2 months. You know, what would we do?
Well, we'll leave it at that for this episode, because we're coming up on our time. But thank you very much, Laura, for this
My
discussion.
pleasure.
It was enlightening. It was thought-provoking. Thank you very much for taking the time. And
Anytime.
well, we will maybe I'll have you on when in a few months. We'll see how the political fortunes change in this province in the next year.
Well, first they got to get back to work. So we're gunning for that first. Let's get them back into the office. That would be nice.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.